They told me the line would break by dusk. I wrote that down because I write everything down. It is the one thing my people are good for in a war like this. We come after with our slates and our sample kits, and we record how the others died. The cast auxiliary, catalogers, that is the polite word. The soldiers have a less polite one, and they are not wrong to use it. So I want it on the record, in my own hand, that the line did not break by dusk. I was seconded to the human position on Har Vel in the last third of the siege, when the conquered's forecasters had already stamped the world lost and moved their attention to the worlds they thought they could still save. My orders were 3 sentences long. Observe the human auxiliaries under sustained predation. Document cause and sequence of collapse. Recover what instruments remain. Nobody wrote observe how they hold, because nobody who wrote my orders believed there would be anything left to observe by the time I arrived. You should understand what I was before you understand what I saw, or the account will mean less than it should. I am Deo Rel of the Cast Auxiliary, and by the time Har Vel I had been doing the work 11 years. The Cast are not soldiers. We are not even properly of the conquered, only bound to it, the way a small tributary river is bound to the sea it empties into, whether it chose the sea or not. My people gave up war a long time before this one started, not out of virtue, I want to be honest, but out of arithmetic, because we did the sums early and saw we would lose any war we entered, and so we made ourselves useful to the winners instead. We record. We are very good at it. A cast cataloger can stand over a battlefield the morning after and reconstruct the whole of it, from the fall of the bodies and the scatter of the brass and the angle of the last positions, and write it down so exactly that the generals who fought it will read the account and say, yes, that is how it went. That is precisely how we lost. We are the memory the war keeps of itself. It is not nothing. But it is not much, either, and I had known for years that it was not much, in the way you know a thing without letting it come all the way up into the light. 19 actions I had catalogued before Har Vel. I could tell you the name of every one of them, and I could tell you the hour each line gave. I had gotten so I could feel it coming. The giving, there is a smell to it, a slackening, a moment when the men stop looking at the enemy and start looking at each other, and then at the ground behind them. I had learned to have my slate ready when that moment came, because after it came the recording was quick, and I could be at the collection point taking the tags almost before the last of them had run. That was my competence. That was the shape my mind had been beaten into over 11 years. I could forecast a collapse nearly as well as the forecasters could from inside it by feel. So when they set me down at the customs hall on Har Vel and the transport lifted off fast and low with its lights off, and I stood in the broken doorway with my kit, I already knew what I had come to write. I had smelled it from the air. 40 men hurt, out of supply, 4 days into a Gelt pressure siege. I did not need the forecast. I could feel the giving in it already, or thought I could. I had my slate ready. I remember the light more than anything. That is a strange thing to lead with in an account of a battle, but it is true. The station they had me in was an old stone customs hall, from back when Har Vel still had trade to tax. A long, low building with a spine of skylights running the length of the roof, and half those skylights blown out, so that the noon sun came down in hard white bars across the floor. They had laid the cots in the bars of light. On purpose. A human medic named Fenn told me that later. You put the bad ones where they can feel the sun, he said. It costs nothing and it does something. I did not understand him then. I wrote it down. Wrote down is what I did instead of understanding, for most of that first day. I had catalogued human dead before on other worlds, but I had never worked among the human living for any length of time, and the first hour in that hall was a lesson in how little the dead teach you about the living. In the accounts I had filed, humans were a category, auxiliaries, medium infantry, notable for endurance, notable for a refusal to yield behavior the analysts flagged as tactically irrational. That was the whole of them in the record, tactically irrational endurance. I had written that phrase myself more than once, standing over their bodies, and I had believed it was a complete description. Standing in the customs hall with the sun coming down in bars, I began to understand that I had been describing the outside of a thing I had never once looked into. It is a humbling business to find that 11 years of careful, accurate writing has been accurate about the surface of a thing and blind to its whole interior. I did not feel it as humbling yet, that first hour. I only felt that my categories were sliding, and I did not like it, and I gripped my slate the way you grip a rail on a floor that has begun to move. The Gelt do not fight the way anything else fights. I had read the reports. Everyone in this war has read the reports, and most of them are wrong, softened by people who have never stood a line against them. The Gelt hunt by exhaustion. They do not want your position, and they do not especially want your ground. They want your fatigue. They come in loose and they come in shifts, and they never fully break contact. There is always pressure, always a shape at the edge of the light, always the low clicking they make in their throats that is not communication so much as a metronome, a thing designed to keep you awake and afraid on their schedule instead of yours. Their doctrine is patience. They will circle a position for 6 days and take it on the 7th when the defenders are hollow-eyed and slow, and they will not have lost a single one of their own to do it. That is how they took Anvar. That is how they took the whole south of the continent. That is how the forecasters knew to the hour when a human line would give. I had catalogued the aftermath of the Gelt way twice before on other worlds, and both times the thing that had struck me was how clean it was. No great heaps of the dead. No churned ground. A Gelt taken position looks, when you walk it the morning after, almost peaceful, the defenders fallen where fatigue finally put them down, most of them not even facing the right direction, taken in the gray hour when the eye stops tracking and the hand stops answering. The Gelt do not overwhelm. They wait for you to become unable, and then they walk in through the gap where your ability used to be. I had written both of those actions up as models of the enemy's method. Efficient, patient, nearly bloodless for the attacker. I had admired the technique the way you admire a thing you have decided you cannot beat. That admiration is a kind of surrender you do not notice yourself making. I had made it years before, at some hour I could not name, and I did not know I had made it until Harvel unmade it. Except the forecasters used the wrong number for the humans. I know that now. I did not know it when I carried my kit through the broken door of that customs hall, and a rifleman on the nearest cot turned his head in the bar of sunlight and looked at me. He was gray. I want to be precise, because precision is the only honest thing I have to offer. Not gray the way my own kind goes when the blood pulls in. A human going gray is a different color, a wax color, the lips losing their line. He had been shot through the left side below the ribs, and the field seal on it was 3 hours old and starting to weep at the edge. By every table I had ever been trained on, he had perhaps a day. He should have been unconscious. He was not unconscious. He was counting. 12, he said, not to me, to the ceiling, to the bar of light. Rels on the wall, Ossians on the wall. Marden, a pause, a wet breath, Marden's on the wall. That's 12 up. The medic Fenn was working 2 cots down, and he called back without looking, 12 up, Aldous. Lie still. Counting, the gray man said, like that was an answer, and it was. His name was Aldous Vane. I learned it off the tag at his throat before I learned it off his mouth, because I'm a cataloger and the tag is where I look first. But it was not the tag that stopped me. On the same bootlace cord as the tag, riding against the hollow of his throat, there was a single spent rifle casing. Brass. Fired. The primer dimpled, the mouth of it slightly belled from the heat it had taken. Somebody had drilled a clean hole through the base of it and threaded the cord through and knotted it, so that it hung there against his skin the way a soldier of my own people might hang a house token or a name bead. I had catalogued 1,000 human bodies by then, and I had never once seen a spent casing worn like that. I noted it. I actually took my slate out and noted it, standing over a dying man, because that is the shape my mind had been beaten into. Spent casing, worn at throat, significance unknown. He watched me write it. His eyes were sharper than the rest of him had any right to be. You're the counter, he said, the one they sent to write down how we die. I observe, I said. I had said it 100 times. It had never once sounded thin before. Good, Aldous Vane said. Then observe close. You're going to want to get this part right. I did not know what he meant. I found out over the next 11 hours, and I have spent every day since trying to get it right, and this is the closest I have come. The first thing you must understand about that station is that nobody in it was well. This was not a reserve line with fresh troops. This was the bottom of the barrel, the walking wounded, the twice wounded, the men who by any sane military doctrine should have been evacuated a week ago and had refused, or had nowhere to be evacuated to. Fenn had a bad hand, 2 fingers gone at the second knuckle and the wound not clean. The section commander, a broad, quiet man named Ossian Carr, had a splinter of stone in his thigh that he would not let anyone dig for, because digging for it meant lying down, and lying down meant not being on the wall. There were maybe 40 of them holding a building meant for 200, against a Gelt pressure siege that had already run for days and had, by the forecast, exactly 1 more day in it before the metronome did its work, and they went hollow and slow, and got taken in the gray hour before a dawn they would not see. I made my inventory of them, because that is the first thing I do always. I take the shape of the room before I take anything else. It is how a cataloger keeps from being surprised, and I did not yet know that this room was going to surprise me no matter how carefully I took its shape. There was a man near the door with both feet wrapped and blackened at the toes, frost-rot from the high passes, who could not stand but had propped himself where he could see the entrance and had a sidearm across his lap. There was a pair of them at the far wall, brothers by the look, one whole and one with his jaw wired, the whole one doing the talking for both. There was the boy, I did not have his name yet, T.O., the recruit, moving among the cots with a water can, and he was the only one in the whole hall who moved like he still expected to be alive in a week, and I marked him privately as the first one likely to break, because in my experience the ones who still carry the future in their walk are the ones the gray hour takes hardest when it comes. I was wrong about him. I was wrong about nearly everyone in that hall, and I want the record to show the exact shape of how wrong I was, because it is the only apology I can offer them. 40 tired, hurt, out-of-supply humans, and the casing. I did not understand the casing until the second hour. It began with Ossian Carr. He came down off the wall in the early afternoon. They rotated, even that thin. They rotated so no one stood the line past the point where the eye goes unreliable, and he came down gray around the mouth from the splinter he would not let anyone touch, and he went cot to cot. Not to check the wounded. I thought at first he was checking the wounded, doing the commander's rounds, and I readied my slate to record the standard thing, morale intervention, verbal. But that is not what he was doing. He stopped at Aldous Vane's cot, and Aldous Gray, weeping at the seal, a day from dead by every table I owned. Aldous reached up and took the casing off over his own head, cord and all, and held it out. "You're back on the wall," Aldous said. Ossian took the casing. He did not argue. This is the part I could not fit into any category I had. A section commander, taking a fired shell casing from a dying private and putting the cord over his own head, and touching the belled brass mouth of it once with his thumb and going back up to the wall with it against his throat. As though it weighed something. As though it did something. I went a Fenn. I am not proud of how I went to him. I went as the cataloger, brisk, with the slate up, wanting the datum. "The casing," I said, "the one they pass. Explain the significance for the record." Fenn looked at me for a while. He had a way of looking that I came to know, not unkind, but taking your measure, deciding how much of the truth you could carry. He said, "How many battles have you been at the end of counter?" 19, I said. "And how many of them did the line hold?" I did not answer because the honest answer was none. I had been sent to 19 collapses. That is what a cataloger is for. You do not send the recorder to the victories. The victors write their own. "Then you've never seen the debt work," Fenn said. "So I'll tell you and you write it down, and maybe today you'll get to see it too." He wrapped his bad hand slower as he talked, the two-fingered hand, and his voice was flat and tired and certain. That casing came out of Aldous' rifle at Corin Gap, the first winter. He fired his last round covering a man named Deal who'd gone down in the open. No ammunition left in the whole section, and Aldous fired his very last round and it did the job, and Deal got up and got back. And Deal picked that casing up out of the snow, still warm, and he pressed it into Aldous' hand and he said, "Fen stopped. Started again. He said, 'You owe me one shot back.' Meaning, you spent your last one on me. So now you don't get to die until you've been paid. You don't get to let go. Somebody owes you a shot, and a debt like that has to be collected in person." I did not understand yet. I wrote it down and I did not understand. "Deal's dead," Fen said. "Took him at Anvar, but the casing went on, because that's the thing about the debt, it doesn't clear. You pay a man his shot back and now he owes it forward and it moves down the line hand to hand, and every man who carries it for a while is a man who has been told out loud by another man, 'You are not allowed to die yet, you are owed.' It's not a medal. Medals are for after. This is for during. It's a way of saying the one thing that actually holds a line, which is, I will spend my last round on you, and you will spend yours on me, and neither of us gets to stop until the other one's been paid." I asked him, and I am ashamed of the question now, but I asked it, because it was the cataloger's question, and the cataloger was still most of what I was. I asked him what happened when a man who carried the casing died anyway. Surely they died anyway sometimes. The wound did not care about the cord. Fen did not take offense. He had the patience of a man who has explained a true thing to a great many people who could not yet hold it. "Then the man he owed collects it off his body," he said, "and carries it, and now he's owed by a dead man, which is the heaviest kind there is, because a dead man can't ever release you from it. You want to talk about a thing that holds a line, put the casing on a man who's owed by somebody in the ground. He will not go. I've seen a man with a wound that should have folded him keep 3 others alive across 2 days because the cord round his neck was a debt to a dead friend and he'd sooner die on his feet paying it than lie down owing it. That's not bravery. Bravery runs out same as everything. That's account keeping. And account keeping doesn't run out. It just moves." I wrote it down. Account keeping doesn't run out. It just moves. I have that line in my hand exactly as he said it, and I have read it 1,000 times since, and it is the truest sentence anyone has ever said to me about war, and it was said to me by a two-fingered medic in a customs hall the enemy had already scheduled to fall. Bright noon fell through the broken skylights across the cots. I stood in a bar of it with my slate, and I felt, for the first time in 19 collapses, that my instrument was too small for what it was pointed at. Because here is what my own people's doctrine says, and what the Gelt doctrine says, and they agree, the two great enemies of this war agree on this one thing. A soldier's will to fight is a resource. It depletes. You can measure its depletion. Fatigue, casualties, hunger, cold, the metronome of pressure, these draw the reservoir down, and when it hits the floor, the line breaks, and you can forecast the hour it hits the floor if your arithmetic is good. That is not cynicism. It is simply true of every army I had ever catalogued. The reservoir empties and the men run, and you write down when. The casing was a hole in the arithmetic, because the debt did not deplete, it compounded. Every time a man got low, another man handed him the casing and told him he was owed, and the reservoir went back up, not to full, never to full, but up off the floor, 1 more hour, 1 more shift on the wall. And the man who gave the casing away was not diminished by giving it. He was steadied by it, because now he had a reason too. He was owed from the other direction. It went both ways down the same cord. A thing that should have run out kept refilling itself out of nothing but 2 men's refusal to let each other stop. The Gelt forecast assumed a reservoir that only empties. They had the wrong number. I have to tell the rest of it more slowly, because the rest of it is what I was sent to see, and I am the only one who wrote it down. The pressure came hardest in the afternoon. The Gelt seemed to sense, they do sense these things, they are patient the way weather is patient, that this was near the forecast hour, and they leaned in. The clicking picked up along the whole perimeter, that dry throat metronome from 3 sides at once, and shapes came up out of the low ground faster than they had all siege. I stayed low behind the customs counter with my kit, and I did my job, which in a live action is to receive the wounded as they come down off the wall and stabilize what I can and record what I can't. I had never done it under real pressure before. 19 collapses and I had always arrived after. This was during. During is a different country. I had not known that. I want to set it down plainly because it is the center of what Harvell taught me. 11 years I had believed I understood battle, and I had understood only its corpse. During is a different country, and it has a different air, and the air is made of noise. The customs hall filled with it, the flat hard bark of the human rifles, spaced and deliberate because they were counting rounds. Never the long panic bursts my own analysts had told me humans favored, and under that the gelt clicking, and under that the specific sound I will never lose, which is the sound of a hurt man deciding out loud not to be hurt yet. They talked, the humans, all through it. Not chatter. A running low exchange, name to name, up and down the wall, reload on your left, I see him. Took him, watch the gap, Tio pull back one and hold. A constant weaving of voices that I understood slowly over the afternoon was itself a kind of casing. Every voice that answered was a man saying, I am still here. You are not alone on this wall, and every man who heard it answered back to keep it going. They held the line with their mouths as much as their rifles. My people go silent under pressure. I had always thought silence was discipline. I sat behind that counter and learned that the humans had found something better than discipline, and it sounded like ordinary men talking. They brought Martin down with his forearm open to the bone. Fen was elbow deep in someone else, so it was mine. And my hands did not know the shapes of human vessels the way they knew my own people's, and I was slow, and Martin watched me be slow with a patience I did not deserve. And when I finally had it clamped and wrapped, this man with his arm laid open, he did not thank me. He looked past me up toward the wall and he said, Who's got the casing? Ossian's got it, someone said. Ossian's fine then, Martin said, and he closed his eyes, and I realized he had not been asking for himself. He had been checking the debt, making sure it was somewhere on someone holding. As long as the casing was on the wall on a living man, the line was not going to give, and Martin could close his eyes and let me work because the load-bearing thing was still bearing. The frost-rot man at the door fired twice from where he sat and called out a hit in a voice gone thin with pain, and one of the brothers at the far wall answered him, Good shooting. Hold what you've got. And I saw the frost-rot man's face change at being answered, saw the thin voice steady. It cost the brother nothing. It did something. Fenn's whole haul ran on that exchange, on the ledger of small things given at no cost that steadied a man past where his own body would have let him steady. I had catalogued the physics of 100 defensive positions, and I had never once had a column in my ledger for this. And I understood, behind that counter, with a hurt man's blood drying on my hands, that my ledger had been missing the only column that finally mattered. It moved 4 times that afternoon. I tracked it, because tracking is what I am. Ossian took a graze along the scalp that blinded him with his own blood for a few minutes and came down, and he pressed the casing into the hand of a young one, barely more than a recruit, a boy named Tio who had gone very still and quiet in the way that comes right before a man's will empties out. Ossian pressed it into his hand and said the words, You owe me 1 shot back, and I watched the boy come back into his own eyes. Watched it happen. He had been leaking away and the cord went round his neck and the leaking stopped. He went up on the wall and he held. I have to dwell on Tio for a moment because he was the one I had privately marked as first to break, and watching me be wrong about him was the moment my old certainties came fully apart. He had gone the way I knew. I had seen it in 19 actions, the stillness, the eyes going to the middle distance, the water can set down and forgotten, the empty look. I had a word for that look in my filings. I called it pre-collapse affect, and I had learned to log the hour it appeared because the giving usually followed within the half. It appeared on Tio at the height of the afternoon, and I logged the hour out of pure habit, and I thought, There, that is the first thread, that is where it starts to come apart. And then Ossian, streaming blood from his own scalp, half-blind, put the warm brass in the boy's hand and said 6 words, and the pre-collapse affect went off Tio's face like a shadow going off a field when the cloud passes. He blinked. He came back. He picked his rifle up off the floor and he went to the wall, and I watched him hold a section of it for 2 hours that by my arithmetic he did not have the reserve to hold for 10 minutes. My arithmetic had never had the casing in it. My arithmetic had been counting a reservoir that only emptied, and here was a boy being refilled in front of me out of nothing but 6 words and a piece of fired brass. And I sat there with my slate, and I did not log a single thing for a long while, because there was no column for what I was watching, and I did not yet dare to make one. I am a cataloger. I deal in cause and sequence. I am telling you the cause and the sequence. The cause was a fired brass casing worth nothing, drilled and strung on a bootlace, and the sequence was that it kept a line of hurt, exhausted, out-of-supply men on a wall 4 hours past the hour they were forecast to break, and every hour past the forecast was an hour the Gelt had not planned to spend, and the Gelt do not have a doctrine for a reservoir that refills. It went from Tio to one of the brothers when the boys' section quieted, and the far wall got hot. The whole one, the one who talked for both, took it and put it round his own neck, and I saw this. He leaned his forehead a moment against his wire-jaw brother's forehead before he went, the 2 of them just resting skull to skull for the length of a breath, and I understood that the casing round the one meant the other was held too, because a man carrying the debt does not leave a brother behind to collect it off. It went from the brother to Fen himself late, when Fen's bad hand seized up, and he could not close it, and he needed, I think, less the wall than the reason, and the brother pressed it into Fen's good hand, and said the words to the medic the way the medic had said them to 100 others, and Fen, who had explained the whole thing to me 2 hours before with the flat certainty of a man describing whether Fen's eyes went wet at being on the receiving end of it, and he nodded. And he flexed the bad hand until it answered, and he went back to his cots. Even the man who knew exactly what the casing was and exactly how it worked was not immune to it working on him. That was the last thing I understood before the light went gold. It is not a trick. Knowing how it works does not take the working out of it. It is real. The way a debt to a man you love is real, and you can see the whole mechanism of it and still be held by it, because the mechanism is not the point. The love the mechanism carries is the point. By late afternoon, the light had gone gold and long, coming almost level through the broken skylights now, and Alda's vein was worse. I had kept coming back to his cot between the others, because he was the one I could not classify, and my mind kept worrying at him. He should have gone under hours ago. He had not. He lay in the moving bar of gold light, and he counted. Every time a name came down off the wall alive, he added it, and every time the casing changed hands, he tracked where it went. And this counting, I understood at last, was the same thing as the casing. It was him holding on by holding on to them. He would not let himself go dark while there were still names to count up. He was owed. He had been told he was owed. And a man who has been told, out loud by another man, that he is not allowed to die yet, that man, it turns out, will do arithmetic on the ceiling for 11 hours to keep the promise. But he was failing. The seal had given up, and the wound was a slow, certain thing now, and I had done everything my kit allowed, and it was not going to be enough. I knew the shape of this. I had catalogued it 1,000 times. This was the part where I write the time and close the entry. I had written that entry 1,000 times, and it had never once cost me anything. I want to be honest about that, because the honesty is the whole point of a record. For 11 years I had closed entries on human dead the way you close a door on an empty room, a small necessary motion, nothing behind it. I had thought of it as respect, my carefulness with their names, my refusal to round them off. I understand now that carefulness is not the same as grief, and that I had been careful with 1,000 men precisely because I had not let myself grieve any of them, because grieving them would have meant admitting they were not a category. and admitting they were not a category would have meant admitting that the thing I did for a living, arrive after, write it down, recover the instruments, was the work of a people who had decided, long ago, at an hour we could not name, to be careful instead of to hold. I had my slate ready to close Aldous Vane's entry. My hand was steady, and something in me, for the first time in 19 actions, did not want the entry closed, and I did not have a column for that either. He knew it too. He was clearer about it than I was. "Come here, Counter," he said. His voice had gone to almost nothing. I came. I knelt in the gold light by his cot. And Aldous Vane, who by every table I owned was already gone, lifted his hand. Ossian had brought the casing back to him an hour before, a thing I did not understand until this moment. They had brought it back to the dying man on purpose. They had given the debt back to Aldous so that Aldous would have a reason to stay through the hour they most needed the line to hold, and it had worked. He had stayed. Aldous lifted his hand with the casing in it, and he pressed it into my palm. The brass was warm. That is the detail I will carry until my own last hour. It was warm from lying against his throat, warm the way a live thing is warm, and he folded my 4 fingers over it with his own hand, which was cold, and he held my fist closed inside his cold hand around the warm brass. "You owe me 1 shot back," he said. I started. I wanted to tell him I was not a soldier, I was a cataloger. I did not fire the round, I had no place in the debt. I was cast auxiliary. I came after. I wrote things down. "Doesn't matter that you didn't fire it," he said, reading me the way Finn read me. "That's not the debt. The debt's not the round. The debt is a long breath, the longest yet. Somebody owes you, so you don't get to stop. And now somebody owes you, so you don't get to stop." His eyes found mine and held. "You keep pulling the next one back, that's the shot, that's how you pay me. You pull the next one back and the one after that, and you don't let go, and we're square. You hear me, Counter?" "I hear you," I said. I did not decide to say it, it came out of me. "Say the count," he said. I did not know what he meant, and then I did. I looked down my own aid station, down the bars of gold light, at the cots, at the men, and I counted the living the way he had been counting them all day, out loud for him, so that the last thing he heard was the number holding. "Fenn's up," I said. "Ossian's up, Marden's up, Tio's up." I made myself keep going. I named every living man in that hall, and my voice did not shake, because his need for it to not shake was the last order anyone was ever going to give me, and I was not going to fail it. 19 up, I finished. 19 up, Aldous. 19 up, he said, barely. And then I have to be precise, because it is the only honest thing I have. He did not die. Not then. The Count held him. Fenn told me later that they lose men and they save men, and the difference is not always the wound. Sometimes the difference is whether there's a reason on the near side of the dark worth the crawl back. And I had, without meaning to, put 19 reasons in a row into the air over his cot, and closed his cold hand around my warm fist around the brass. He went under, but he went under owed. And a man who goes under owed sometimes comes back to collect. The gelt broke off at last light. I want to be careful here because I'm a cataloger and I will not inflate the record. There was no great charge, no reversal, no moment of glory. The humans did not drive them off. That is not what happened, and I will not write that it happened. What happened is simpler and I think now larger. The gelt hunt by exhaustion, and they had come to the customs hall with a forecast, and the forecast said the line would go hollow and slow in the gray hour and give. And the line did not go hollow. Hour after forecast hour, the shapes came up out of the low ground and the wall answered, tired and hurt and refilling itself off a cord passing hand to hand. And the metronome clicked and the humans stood. And somewhere in the gelt patience, which is real, which is a kind of genius, which had taken a continent, somewhere in it a number failed to come true. And a predator that hunts by the certainty of the other thing's collapse does not know what to do when the collapse does not arrive. It is not in their doctrine. So as the sun went down red through the broken skylights, the clicking thinned, and the shapes went back down into the low ground and did not come up again. I have thought a great deal since about what it must have been at the other end of that. The Gelt are not stupid. Nothing that patient is stupid. Somewhere out in the low ground there was a Gelt reckoner, whatever they use for one, watching the same forecast I had been handed, watching the hour come when the human line was to go hollow. And the hour came, and the line did not go hollow, and I imagine the reckoner waited, because that is what they do, they wait and gave it another hour and another, and each hour the arithmetic that had taken a whole continent sat there and refused to close. I imagine there is nothing more frightening, to a creature whose entire method is patience, than prey that will not be outlasted. Their whole doctrine is a bet that the other thing empties first. Faced with a thing that refills itself, they have no move. They cannot wait it out because it does not wait out. So they do the only thing left, which is to break contact and go find something that empties on schedule. That is not defeat for the Gelt. It is a correction. They simply cross the humans out of the ledger of things that can be taken by waiting and moved on. But crossing the humans out of that ledger is, itself, the largest thing a human line can do to the Gelt, because that ledger is the whole of how they make war, and every name crossed out of it is a name they can never take the cheap way again. They did not lose. The humans did not win. The Gelt simply could not make the arithmetic close, and a predator that cannot close the arithmetic breaks contact and goes to find prey whose reservoir only empties. That is the whole of it. That is what I was sent to observe. I observed it. I wrote it down. Aldous Vane lived. I will not pretend I saved him. The evacuation flight came in the dark once the pressure was off, and better hands than mine had him under lights within the hour, and it was those hands and his own stubborn refusal that did it, not my slate. But when they loaded him he was still owed, and a man who is still owed has a grip on the world that the tables do not measure, and he made it. Fenn made it. Ossian made it. The boy Tio made it. Martin lost the arm but kept the rest. 12 of the 40 did not, and I have their names in my hand too. And I have written each of them the way you write a name you are not allowed to round off. I kept the casing. I did not ask permission, and no one asked for it back. In the confusion of the flight it stayed in my fist, warm and then cool. And by the time I thought to return it, it was somehow already mine, the way the debt is always somehow already yours the moment it is pressed into your hand. I drilled a second hole and rethreaded the cord where the old knot had frayed, and I wear it under my collar, against the hollow of my throat, where a soldier of my own people might hang a name bead, though I am not a soldier and never was. I tried once in the weeks after to file it. That is the reflex of my whole life. A thing happens, you find the column, you write it in. I sat with my slate and I tried to give the casing a line in the record, a proper entry, cause and significance and material description. Spent rifle casing, brass, drilled, worn at throat, function, morale instrument, mechanism, debt transfer between combatants. I got that far and I stopped, because every word of it was true and all of it together was a lie, the way the outside of a thing is a lie about its inside. There is no column for it. I have decided there is not supposed to be. Some instruments you recover by taking them off a battlefield and carrying them to the collection point, and one instrument you recover by letting it be pressed into your palm and never setting it down again. My people have spent a long time believing everything can be filed. The casing is the one thing I have found that cannot, and I have come to think that is exactly why it works, and exactly why we lost every war we were careful enough to catalog and never brave enough to hold. My orders were 3 sentences long. Observe the human auxiliaries under sustained predation. Document cause and sequence of collapse. Recover what instruments remain. There was no collapse to document, so I documented the other thing. And as for the instruments, I recovered one. It is spent, and it is worth nothing, and it is the single most load-bearing instrument I have ever held, and it is the reason I am still, 3 years and 11 more lines later, doing the only work that debt allows. I go where the pressure is worst. I kneel in the bars of daylight by the cots of men my own people's forecasters have already stamped as lost, And when one of them starts to go gray and quiet and leak away, I take the warm brass off over my head, and I press it into his hand, and I fold his fingers over it, and I say the words, because somebody said them to me, and now I am not allowed to stop. You owe me one shot back. It has never once failed to bring a man's eyes back into his own head. Not once in 11 lines. My people call it superstition. Let them. My people have cataloged 19 collapses and never held a wall, and I have stood in the gold light and watched a fired shell casing worth nothing keep 40 hurt men on a wall 4 hours past the hour they were forecast to break, and I know which of us is holding the wrong number. The forecasters think a war is won by the side whose reservoir lasts longest. They have never had a warm casing pressed into their palm. They have never been told out loud by a dying man that they are owed, and are therefore not permitted to stop. They do not know that there are peoples in this galaxy who long ago did the one thing that makes the arithmetic fail, who decided, and passed the decision hand to hand down a bootlace cord, that no one gets to let go while there is still someone on the near side of the dark worth the crawl back for. You cannot wear that down. I have tried to explain this to my superiors and I have failed, and I have stopped trying, and I have gone back to the line instead, because the debt does not clear and I would not want it to. I am owed one shot, so I do not get to stop. Neither now do you, because I have set it down here in my own hand for the record, and a thing written down is a thing pressed into a palm. You have read how they held. You know the count now. 19 up. Say it if you ever stand where the light comes down in bars across the cots and a gray man starts to leak away and you have nothing in your kit that will reach him. Tell him he owes you one shot back. Then keep him. That is how you pay it. That is how it stays square.